The message echoed through the galactic network, piercing the calm of the galactic concord like a sudden thunderclap. This is Fleet Admiral Ada Marlowe. Humanity returns. Stand by. It was broadcast in every language, through every channel, a declaration that seemed more like a ghostly echo of a nightmare long forgotten. The galaxy had moved on. The once terrifying human fleet, legendary for its advanced technology and ruthless tactics, had been presumed lost forever. No one knew what had happened after humanity's mysterious vanishing centuries ago. Earth, their homeworld, was a myth, its location lost to time, buried under the weight of centuries of uncertainty. Yet here it was again, humanity's war fleet, reappearing in the most unlikely of places. In the control room of the Concord High Command, representatives from dozens of species stared in stunned silence at the holoscreen before them. The enormity of the situation hung in the air like a thick fog. How could this be? How could the humans, who had disappeared without a trace, return after so long? And why now? High Chancellor Tyvex of the insectoid Silothian species was the first to speak. His voice, though calm, was laced with the unmistakable edge of unease. This message, it cannot be real. How could humanity's fleet have survived this long? The technological cost of such isolation. The humans didn't vanish, Chancellor, interjected Dr. Sarai Noor, an alien historian from the peaceful elven people. She leaned forward, her long fingers tracing patterns in the air as she spoke. They weren't destroyed. They were hidden. Earth, their homeworld, was protected by something far beyond what we thought was possible. But now they've returned, and not just as survivors. They're a force. She paused. And they want something. Before Tyvex could respond, an alert flickered on the command screens. A small cluster of human ships had just entered the outer rim of a neighboring system. At first, their trajectory seemed erratic, as if they were testing the waters. Then, without warning, one of the ships moved towards a quiet, uninhabited moon on the edge of the system and fired a single shot. A beam of light so concentrated it briefly outshone the sun itself. The system's sensors blinked red, and a wave of unease rippled through the room. There were no other ships present to challenge the humans, but the implications of such an action were clear. This wasn't a friendly visit. This was a test, and it had left behind nothing but smoldering debris. Dr. Noor stood frozen, her mind racing. They've already begun, she muttered to herself, before raising her voice for the others. The humans are not just returning to reclaim what they lost. They're reasserting their place in the galaxy. This is a declaration of power. Tyvex's mandibles clicked in agitation, his eyes narrowing. And we are supposed to do what? Wait for them to make their next move. He turned to the gathered council. We cannot let them dictate the future. The galaxy will not bow to their ghosts. A long silence followed as the council members exchanged glances. What could they do? The human fleet was here, and it was clear from the initial display of force that their return was not a peaceful one. And yet, none of them dared to act without understanding more. What did they want? Why had they returned? The answer came quickly. Another message, this time from Marlowe herself, crackled to life across the frequency. We didn't vanish. We've been waiting. The galaxy is not ready for what comes next. Stand by and prepare. The message from Fleet Admiral Ada Marlowe sent shockwaves throughout the galactic concord. The calm of the galaxy, built over centuries of peace, had been shattered by a simple declaration. We didn't vanish. We've been waiting. The galaxy is not ready for what comes next. Stand by and prepare. But no one knew what that truly meant. What did humanity want? What were they preparing for? 2 days after Marlowe's broadcast, the first true sign of their intentions arrived. A fleet of human ships, massive, sleek war vessels, entered the same system where the initial attack had occurred. There were no formal greetings, no trade offers, no attempts at diplomacy. They simply appeared in orbit above a barren moon, their massive hulls gleaming in the distant starlight. The Concorde, ever cautious, watched as the human ships sent out a wave of automated drones that descended onto the moon. There was no sign of hostility, but the action was chilling in its quiet efficiency. The drones deployed quietly, swiftly, performing scans of the landscape, then promptly returning to the human ships. It was a reconnaissance mission, but for what purpose? The galaxy had never seen anything like it before. In the High Command's chamber, tension was thick. The representatives from the Concorde's various species had assembled, their bodies shifting nervously. High Chancellor Tyvek stood at the head of the room, his 6 eyes flickering with distrust. "We can't let them continue this." His voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. "We need to strike first before they can claim more systems as their own. We cannot allow them to test our defenses." But not all were in agreement. Dr. Sarai Noor, whose expertise in extinct civilizations had become invaluable in recent days, raised her hand, her tone calm but unwavering. "What they're doing is not an invasion. It's an assessment. They're testing the stability of our systems, not attacking. Humanity is a shadow now, an echo. They are not trying to conquer. They're trying to understand, to know if we're ready for what's coming." Tyvek snarled, his antennae twitching. "Understand? Understand what, exactly? They're sending drones into our territory, and you want us to sit idly by." Before Dr. Noor could respond, the holoscreen before them flickered to life, showing a human warship broadcasting a message to the Concorde. The screen filled with a familiar, yet deeply unsettling face. Fleet Admiral Ada Marlowe, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, her expression unreadable. "Chancellor Tyvek," she began, her voice cold but composed, "we are not here to challenge your sovereignty. We are not here to wage war, but we have come to inform you of a threat that concerns every one of us. We are the last defense against an enemy you cannot begin to comprehend." The room was silent as Marlowe's words hung in the air. "The silence is coming," she continued, "and it doesn't care who you are or where you are from. It will erase everything you hold dear, if it hasn't already. We've been fighting it for centuries. We did not return to conquer. We returned to warn you." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "But I fear that by the time you understand the magnitude of the threat, it will already be too late." As the transmission ended, the room was filled with an electric hum of disbelief. "They speak of an enemy, but we have no proof." Tyvek was the first to break the silence, his voice filled with doubt. "How do we know their claims are real? How do we know they aren't just using the silence as a pretext to advance their own agenda?" Dr. Noor stepped forward, shaking her head. "I believe them, Chancellor. I've studied their history. They have faced enemies beyond anything we can imagine. Their war fleets were not just tools of conquest, they were survival mechanisms. Humanity has seen horrors we can't even fathom." Tyvek glared at the screen where Marlowe had just disappeared, a mixture of fear and anger in his expression. "Then let them prove it." The galaxy was on edge. Humanity's fleet had returned, and the question was no longer just why, but how far they were willing to go to ensure their survival. The return of humanity's war fleet had set off a chain reaction. What was meant to be a peaceful, diplomatic attempt at engagement quickly spiraled into a terrifying standoff. The Galactic Concorde, a fragile coalition of species once united by mutual interest and shared goals, was now splintering at its seams. The more the Concorde leadership examined the human fleet, the more they realized something was amiss. The ships, pristine and sharp in their design, were a ghostly reminder of the old human power, untouched by time, seemingly unaffected by centuries of isolation. Yet the humans were not the same. They carried themselves differently, their communication terse, filled with a cold resolve that sent shivers down the spines of those who remembered humanity's brutal past. But it wasn't just the humans' chilling demeanor that caused alarm, it was their purpose. Fleet Admiral Marlowe's warnings had been clear. The silence is coming. The Concorde's High Council convened in an emergency session to deliberate on the threat. Representatives from various species were divided, each with their own perspective on how to handle the situation. What proof do we have of this silence? Demanded Chancellor Tyvex, his insectoid mandibles clicking in agitation. His species had suffered at the hands of humanity in the past, and the thought of relying on them again stirred old fears. We have no evidence of such an enemy. No attack, no sightings, no data. These humans. We have data, interrupted Dr. Sarai Noor, her voice sharp. She adjusted her delicate glasses, her fingers moving in an almost instinctive gesture. We found remnants of ancient civilizations across the outer rim. Some of them, worlds, empires, vanished without a trace. All signs point to something far worse than a simple war. The silence might not be a ship or fleet we can fight. It's a force, a consuming entity that takes everything. The room fell silent at her words, the weight of them sinking in like a stone dropped into still water. The silence, Marlowe's voice suddenly crackled from the holo transmission, interrupting the council. Her pale blue eyes looked cold and unfeeling, though her tone was grave. Is not a weapon. It is not something you can defeat with your fleet or your weapons. It is an intelligence, a force that devours not just worlds, but time itself. The statement hit like a thunderclap. A few of the Concord leaders shifted uncomfortably, muttering among themselves. The room was charged with distrust. Could they really trust these humans? Would they risk uniting under their banner once more? If we are to believe you, said Thalkin, the leader of the Valkyrie, a race of towering, telepathic beings, then you've been hiding for centuries, and yet you expect us to fight with you. The fleet you bring us is a ghost of war. You haven't even explained how you've survived. Marlowe's face hardened. We did not survive. We fought, and we lost. She let the words linger in the air. Our fleet is all that remains, but we carry with us the last hope for all of you. A tense silence followed. The human ships, stationed just outside Concord space, loomed like dark shadows, waiting. Though they had not made any further aggressive moves, the weight of their presence was undeniable. Tyvex stood, his tall frame bristling with uncertainty and anger. You expect us to unite with you against this silence, a force we know nothing about, based on the word of a fleet we thought dead. It is madness. But before the meeting could devolve into chaos, a sudden, unexpected transmission interrupted the argument. A fleet of ships, alien ships, had appeared in a distant system. They were not from the Concord. They were not human. The transmission was simple, chilling in its brevity. We know what is coming. You are not prepared. A collective shiver ran through the room. The silence in the chamber was oppressive, thick with dread. The galaxy had just received its first warning from beyond the known territories. The silence was real, and it was closer than anyone had imagined. Marlowe's voice cut through the stunned silence. You may not believe us, but we are your last chance to survive. The council chamber was silent as the latest transmission flickered off. The message from the unknown fleet had left the room in a cold, uncertain stillness. There was no further explanation, no offer of peace or alliances, just the chilling statement. We know what is coming. You are not prepared. It had been broadcast on every frequency, yet no one knew who had sent it, or why they were now involved in the escalating crisis surrounding humanity's return. The tension in the room was unbearable. Chancellor Tyvex's compound eyes were narrowed, his antennae twitching in agitation. His people, the Philothians, had long been distrustful of humanity. Memories of their past battles with the humans, their swift and devastating wars, still lingered in the dark recesses of their minds. How are we supposed to take that seriously? Tyvex spat, his voice harsh. One cryptic message from an unknown fleet, and now everyone is suddenly panicking. Dr. Sarai Noor, ever the voice of reason, was quiet for a moment, her mind racing. She had devoted much of her life to studying lost civilizations, especially those that had disappeared without a trace. The thought of a greater galaxy-consuming force had always seemed distant, a distant theory, until now. Her gaze flickered to the human warships hovering on the fringes of Concord space. They were silently waiting, watching. "They are not the only ones who know what's coming," she said softly, though her words carried weight. "We've seen it before, traces of it, remnants. Systems wiped out, gone, as if they had never existed. Entire civilizations erased from the timeline." She turned her attention back to the holographic projections of Marlowe, who appeared once again before the council. The Admiral's face, now more haggard, seemed worn from the weight of the revelations she was sharing. "You want proof," Marlowe said, her voice still clipped and precise. "Then look to the outer rim. I've ordered our ships to enter the regions where the silence has already passed. They'll find nothing. No survivors, no remnants of life, no energy signatures, just nothing. What remains is a hole in the universe itself." Her words hung heavy in the air. Several species began to shift uncomfortably, their own histories of loss and collapse coming to the forefront of their minds. If humanity's warnings were to be believed, the silence was an existential threat, not just to one race or planet, but to the very fabric of existence. "We're running out of time," Marlowe continued. "The silence does not wait. It devours, absorbs, and moves on. It doesn't care for boundaries or allegiances. It will erase us all." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. The implications were clear. If the silence truly operated on the scale that Marlowe was describing, it wouldn't just threaten humanity, it would threaten everything. The galaxy, as they knew it, would cease to exist. Tyvek growled, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "And what do you expect us to do? Throw our fleets into a void we don't understand, against a foe we can't fight? Your words are nothing more than fear-mongering." Marlowe's cold gaze turned to Tyvek's, and for a brief moment, there was something human, a flicker of regret, perhaps in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "If you won't fight," she said, her voice low, "then prepare to be consumed. But know this, the silence doesn't leave survivors. It never does." The council sat in stunned silence. The fracture between fear and reason was widening. Some species, like the Zorak, had been quiet until now, but their leaders were visibly shaken by the sheer certainty of Marlowe's words. If they didn't act, if they didn't trust humanity, their worlds would be next. But trust was a currency few species could afford. As the meeting adjourned, whispers filled the room. Some had already begun to consider their options. Alliances with humanity, sending their fleets into battle, or even retreating to the farthest corners of the galaxy. Dr. Norris stood motionless at the back of the room, her thoughts spinning. If the silence was real, then the galaxy had little time left. But what if Marlowe's words were true? What if the varied fabric of time and space itself was at risk? She had no answers, but she knew one thing for sure. The warning had been given. And now, the galaxy had a choice. The days following the Council's emergency session were marked by tension and uncertainty. Though humanity's warning had been clear, the galaxy's response was anything but unified. As Marlowe's fleet lingered just outside Concord space, waiting for a decision that seemed to drag on forever, the galaxy's factions began to fracture in increasingly hostile ways. Chancellor Tyvek had been vocal in his rejection of humanity's claims. His people, the Thizalothians, had suffered under human dominance in the past and were unwilling to risk their future by aligning with a race they saw as little more than conquerors in disguise. Tyvek rallied the more conservative factions of the Concord, those who believed in maintaining independence, refusing to bend to a new power that had yet to prove itself. Humanity's return is nothing but a prelude to domination, Tyvek declared to the assembled leaders of his faction, a mixture of militaristic species and isolationist races. We've learned nothing from the past if we allow them back into the fold, even with this so-called warning. The silence may be a threat, but it is no excuse for submitting to their demands. Across the galaxy, though, not all were so resolute in their opposition. The elfin, known for their long lifespans and commitment to peace, had been persuaded by Dr. Sarai Noor's analysis. The Elven had always regarded humanity with a sense of quiet reverence. They were a species that had fought wars, built empires, and then mysteriously vanished. To them, the idea that the silence might be real resonated with their own ancient prophecies of extinction. "What if they are right?" asked Lady Sylphira of the Elven, her voice soft but filled with concern. "What if we face something we cannot fight, cannot understand, unless we join them? The humans know loss. They know survival. If they are asking for our help, then perhaps it is time we listen." Even among the Valkyrie, whose telepathic capabilities gave them insight into the intentions of others, there was no clear consensus. Some felt that they should stand with humanity, not out of trust, but because they had no other choice. The Valkyrie had lost much in the past, and the prospect of facing the silence alone was too daunting to ignore. The uncertainty deepened when a faction of the Council's military leaders began to fracture off, forming their own coalition. Led by Admiral Vora, a former military commander of the Kravik, a ruthless, war-hardened species, the faction was determined to prepare for war, not just with the silence, but with humanity itself, should they prove to be a threat. "Humanity may be offering us a warning," Admiral Vora spoke to her assembled fleet commanders, her tone hard and decisive. "But if they think they can command us to act in their name, they are gravely mistaken. We will not kneel before them. Not for their survival, and not for anyone else's." While the larger council bickered and split, the human fleet waited, patient but growing restless. Fleet Admiral Marlowe, who had grown accustomed to navigating both galactic diplomacy and warfare, was beginning to feel the weight of the situation. Her fleet was prepared, but the question wasn't whether they were ready to fight. It was whether they would have to fight alone. In the darkness of space, the threat remained. The silence, though invisible and unknown, seemed to hover just beyond the edge of every conversation, every decision. Humanity's fleet wasn't just waiting for approval, it was waiting for a decision. And that decision was becoming more urgent by the hour. As the galaxy's factions shifted, realigning in uncertain ways, one thing became painfully clear: time was running out. The silence, whatever it was, would not wait for anyone. The galaxy could either unite or fall to whatever was coming. And no one knew which option would be worse. The galaxy was on the edge of chaos. Despite the urgency of Fleet Admiral Marlowe's warnings, the divide between the Concord's factions had only deepened. The isolationist blocs, led by Chancellor Tyvex and Admiral Vora's militaristic faction, continued to harden in their refusal to ally with humanity. Meanwhile, other races, like the Elven and the Valkyrie, began to quietly shift toward cooperation, though they lacked the collective will to take immediate action. The tension, once simmering, reached a boiling point when an unexpected event occurred. A region of space, once thought secure, fell silent. It started as a strange anomaly, a sudden disappearance of energy signatures and life signs from a remote system at the galactic frontier. The area known as the Ivorian Expanse had been home to multiple peaceful colonies and a thriving trade route. Within hours of the first signs of disruption, the Concorde received a dire message from an expeditionary fleet sent to investigate. "This is Captain Lyra Tikas of the Concorde Scout Fleet. We've encountered something. It's everywhere. The systems are gone. There's nothing left but..." The transmission cut off abruptly, followed by a sharp, eerie silence that froze the blood of every being listening. It was the silence. Humanity's warning had come too late. Fleet Admiral Marlowe's voice immediately filled the communication channels, her tone unwavering. "I warned you," she said, her words like ice. "It has begun. The silence is real. What we feared has come to pass. Now it's your turn to decide whether you fight with us or face annihilation on your own." The reality of the threat became undeniable. In the Ivorian Expanse, entire colonies had vanished in mere hours, their star systems swallowed by a force that left no trace behind. The region was now a vast, empty void, a hole where space itself seemed to collapse in on itself, as if something were actively erasing it from existence. The Concord High Command was thrown into disarray. No longer could they debate the threat. Now, it was a matter of survival. Within hours of the incident, the first coordinated attacks by the Silence began to spread across other border systems. The galaxy was being consumed piece by piece, and there was no defense, no countermeasure, nothing but the black, unyielding void that followed the Silence's wake. In the midst of this chaos, the fractured factions of the Galactic Concord were faced with a terrible decision. Their united front had already fractured under the weight of their own suspicions and mistrust, and now the battle lines were drawn in earnest. On one side stood the proponents of humanity's warnings, those who believed that only by joining forces with Marlowe's fleet could they have any hope of survival. The Elven, who had slowly come to realize the depth of the threat, reached out to the human fleet for guidance. The Valkyrie, long seen as mysterious and aloof, extended an olive branch, offering their telepathic abilities to help coordinate the scattered fleets. On the other side, the isolationists and militarists, led by Tyvex and Admiral Vora, refused to bend. They argued that aligning with humanity would be a greater risk than facing the Silence alone. But as the destruction continued to spread, whispers of entire systems disappearing in the blink of an eye, many began to reconsider. It was in this climate of division and uncertainty that humanity made its next move. Without waiting for further deliberation, Marlowe ordered her fleet to engage the Silence directly. Her ships, though formidable, were few compared to the vastness of the galaxy. Yet they had the advantage of years of preparation, honed by decades of fighting the Silence in their own corner of the universe. The human fleet launched a series of strikes against the rapidly expanding voids of destruction, using weapons and technologies the Concord had never seen, devices capable of briefly destabilizing the consuming forces. The battle was a spectacle of light and energy, a desperate attempt to halt the unstoppable. But despite the courage of humanity's fleet, the Silence was relentless. The black void continued to expand, swallowing even the human weapons that were fired at it. Nothing seemed to stop its growth. Yet, in the heart of the conflict, a faint glimmer of hope remained. Humanity's ships had stalled the progress of the Silence for a brief time. Their tactics, though primitive by galactic standards, had shown the first sign that the Silence could be slowed. Perhaps not defeated, but slowed. And that was something. Marlowe's voice echoed across the frequencies once more. This isn't just a war. This is our last chance to stop the end of everything. The Silence was relentless. Despite humanity's valiant attempt to halt its spread, the void continued to swallow entire systems, each one disappearing as if it had never existed. The galaxy, once a shining beacon of unity and cooperation, was now a fractured, war-torn place. The factions of the Galactic Concord were scattered, torn apart by years of suspicion and fear. Only a few, the Elven and the Valkyrie among them, remained aligned with humanity, but their numbers were small compared to the growing opposition. After the first battle, humanity's fleet retreated. They had inflicted some damage, yes, but the Silence was beyond their capacity to destroy. It absorbed everything in its path. Humanity's advanced weaponry, once thought to be their greatest strength, was rendered useless in the face of an enemy that seemed to erase existence itself. As the human fleet withdrew, the cracks within the Galactic Concord deepened. Chancellor Tyvex seized the opportunity, calling for a meeting of the remaining Concord members who had resisted humanity's influence. His voice was sharp, bitter with the memories of past human conquests. We cannot allow ourselves to be consumed by this madness, Tyvex declared, his multiple eyes gleaming with fiery resolve. Humanity has proven it cannot protect us. Their weapons failed. Their warnings were nothing but a ruse to bring us under their control. We must take action ourselves. Admiral Vora, who had previously led a militaristic faction, stood by his side, nodding. We've seen it with our own eyes. The Silence is here, but humanity has no answers. We will fight it our way with our own fleets and with the resolve of our own people. We cannot let the fate of the galaxy rest in the hands of a species we do not trust." The isolationists were loud and unified, their calls for independence growing stronger. They believed that if the galaxy was to survive, it must rely on its own strength, not on humanity's promises. The once proud alliance that had formed the Galactic Concord was now shattered, its unity a distant memory. In contrast, the few remaining members of the pro-human faction, Elven, Valkyrie, and others, were struggling to maintain order. They had witnessed firsthand the truth in Marlowe's words, but even their commitment to humanity's cause was starting to fray. The tide was turning against them. In the midst of the growing discord, another message arrived, a transmission from the human fleet. Marlowe's face appeared on the holoscreen, but this time there was a distinct weight to her expression. Her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, her voice strained. "We've encountered something worse," she said, her tone grim. "The silence is not just consuming us, it's learning from us. It is adapting, becoming stronger with every encounter. Our weapons may have delayed it temporarily, but we cannot fight what we do not understand." The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. The silence, the force they had been fighting against, was evolving. It was no longer just an enemy. It was an intelligent, adaptive force, capable of responding to every countermeasure the galaxy could throw at it. "They are right," Dr. Serainor whispered to herself, her eyes wide with realization. The silence. It's not just a force of destruction. It's a living, thinking entity. And it is becoming smarter. The fleet had been holding its ground, but now the question shifted from how to fight to whether they could win at all. Across the galaxy, the cracks deepened. The fractured factions of the Concord struggled to maintain some semblance of unity. In the far reaches of the galaxy, where the silence had already begun its assault, entire civilizations had been wiped out. The few survivors were scattered, drifting in the dark void of space, seeking refuge wherever they could find it. Humanity's war fleet, battered and bruised, could only fight for so long before it, too, would be consumed. Marlowe's message wasn't a call for hope. It was a plea for survival. The galaxy had never felt more distant, the stars too far apart, the void too immense. The silence, once an abstract threat, had become a relentless and intelligent force, an entity that adapted and evolved with each failed attempt to halt its progress. Humanity's war fleet had struck the first blow, but it was a temporary victory at best. Now the human fleet was battered and broken, their weapons no match for the ever-growing void. The galaxy's leaders, fractured and divided, were left with an impossible choice: unite or perish. The Galactic Concord had all but shattered. Only a handful of species still stood with humanity, the Elven and Valkyrie among them. Yet even they could sense the shifting winds of doubt among their own ranks. Humanity's fleet had proved they could slow the silence, but the truth was that no one knew how to truly defeat it. With each passing moment, the stakes grew higher. In the War Council of Marlowe's flagship, the Morning Star, the weight of the galaxy's future hung heavy in the air. Marlowe stood in front of a holographic map, the images of failing systems flickering like dying embers. The silence had already consumed multiple sectors, spreading with a terrifying, almost methodical precision. "We've reached the point of no return," Marlowe said, her voice quiet, almost hollow. "The silence adapts faster than we can understand. We've seen it in every battle. It learns from us, from our strategies, from our technology. It's evolved beyond our weapons." The remaining commanders and diplomats in the room exchanged grim looks. They had tried everything: attacks, containment strategies, even alliances, and yet they were losing ground. "If we can't fight it directly," began Dr. Serainor, her voice trembling slightly, "then perhaps we need to think differently. The silence isn't just consuming life, it's erasing everything. If we can't stop it, maybe the only option left is to contain it. Trap it somewhere it can't reach." Marlowe turned her steely gaze toward Nor. "Containment might slow it, but it won't stop it. It will only give us more time. And what then? What do we do when the time runs out? A silence fell over the room. For the first time, Marlowe's voice cracked with uncertainty. Even she, who had led humanity through countless battles, was unsure of the path ahead. The galaxy was crumbling, and they were running out of options. Every decision they made felt like it was pushing them closer to the edge. And then, as if answering their silent question, the stars seemed to grow darker. A transmission appeared from the heart of the silence's path. It was a single line of text, sent on a frequency that only a few could decipher. "We have seen you. We have learned." The room froze, the weight of those words settling in like a stone in the pit of their stomachs. It wasn't just a force of nature. It wasn't just a mindless destroyer. The silence was conscious, and it was watching them. In that moment, Fleet Admiral Marlowe knew what they had to do. There was no defeating the silence, not without more time, more knowledge. And they had no more time. But perhaps they could do the one thing the silence could not. "We won't fight it with weapons," she said, her voice cold and resolute. "We'll fight it with everything we are. Unity. The last resource we have. We bring all our people together, every race, every technology, every species, and we create a weapon of knowledge, of culture, of life. We'll force the silence to understand what it's destroying." A murmur of disbelief spread through the room, but Marlowe continued, her eyes fierce. "We may not have the power to defeat it directly, but we can remind it of something it has never encountered, the will to preserve." And so, the final choice was made. The factions of the Galactic Concord, fractured and fractured no more, began to assemble. All their histories, all their knowledge, all their strengths would be combined into a singular effort, a force born not of weapons, but of unity. It would be their last stand, their last chance to show the silence what it was truly trying to erase: life, memory, and the will to survive. As humanity, the Elven, the Valkyrie, and the remaining factions of the Concord came together, one thing was clear: the galaxy was not going down without a fight. And if the silence wanted to take everything, they would have to face the very thing that had defied its own nature: hope. In the face of annihilation, they would stand together, or they would fall united.